what's up? I've shown you guys how to make a lot of different styles of sandwiches on this channel, but none of them are like this one. Today, I'm gonna show you how to make a delicious and gigantic Italian style sub at home, including a giant loaf of bread that's the size of a sheet tray. To get started, I'll need to make a custom piece of gigantic sandwich bread. For that, I'll grab my stand mixer, and into the bowl of that, I'll measure 240 grams of warm water, 9 grams of instant yeast, 10 grams of sugar, 20 grams of olive oil, 360 grams of bread flour, and 9 grams of salt. Now the dough hook goes on, and I'll mix this on low speed for about 3 minutes, or the length of time it takes for the dough to go from not combined to combined, like this. From there, I'll bump the speed up to high and mix it for 4 to 5 more minutes. You can certainly mix this dough without a mixer if you just have hands in a bowl, but I don't want to show that full process here because I've done that quite a bit on this channel, so I'll leave clear instructions down in the description below for those of you without a stand mixer. Once the dough is clear in the bowl and no longer sticking to the bottom, I'll stop the mixer and give it the old tug test to verify gluten development. No tearing, no shearing, so I'll call that done. Next, I'll flip this into a medium bowl and then round the dough into a nice taut ball like this. Starting the fermentation with a uniform shape is going to give us a dough that's a lot easier to turn into a tube later on. Now I'll cover this with a lid and let it ferment here on the counter for 2 hours. 120 minutes later, when I come back, you can see the dough has risen by a lot. There's a lot of yeast in this dough, so that's to be expected. To shape this into a giant submarine sandwich roll, I'll flour the dough, then my board. I'll spread that out a little bit, and then I'll flip out my dough. From there, I'll degas this dough pretty hard to remove any large air pockets. Too much of those inside will make voids inside of the loaf that would make it collapse once we proofed it. Once we're degassed, I'll pull out the sides and fold those over each other like this. Then I'll grab all 4 corners and fold those into the center. I'll flip the dough over onto those seams, and then I'll roll it into a nice tight ball. Now I'm going to cover this with a bowl or a damp towel, and I'll check back in 25 minutes. 25 minutes later, this dough is a lot more relaxed and ready to be shaped into a sandwich vessel. Before I do that, I need a landing pad to proof it on. For me, that's going to be a sheet tray with a layer of parchment paper on it, and to prevent sticking, I'll hit that paper with a touch of pan spray. Okay, to shape this thing, I'm going to very lightly flour the top, and then I'll flip over the whole dough onto that top side. The seam should be facing up now, and for the same reason as before, I'm going to aggressively degas this dough to flatten it out. Once I've got things pancaked a little bit here, I'm going to start to shape by grabbing the top little bit and folding it back over by about 2 inches. When I roll, I press the dough back into itself to seal any tension that I've created. That's the goal. You want to have a lot more than just a skinny shaped tube at the end. You need a taut, skinny tube with a lot of internal tension. That's going to hold the loaf up in the oven. Next, I'll set this tube on that seam, and then I'll roll this outwards with gentle pressure, making sure to keep that seam tucked underneath at all times. Fingertips, thumbs, and palms are all going to work together here to create additional tension and to widen the dough into a narrower shape. And that looks pretty good. Once it's shaped, I'm going to move it over to the sprayed parchment paper on the sheet tray, and from there I'll cover it with another sheet tray so that I can proof it up for 60 to 75 minutes. 75-ish minutes later, when I pull off this sheet tray, you can see that the loaf underneath has grown by just over double. I know it's properly proofed when I give it a poke and the dough just springs back. To break this, I'll grab my bread scoring lame, but also a serrated knife would work if you're lameless, and I'll use that lame to stripe a deep score right down the middle of the loaf. Without this score, the bread basically wouldn't rise in the oven. Once I'm sliced, I'll grab a spray bottle full of water and hit the outside of the loaf with a dozen or so sprays. Into the oven it goes, and I'll bake it for 30 to 35 minutes at 375F 190C. A few more sprays into the hot oven to get a little bit more steam in there. I'll quickly close the door, and I'll check back in a half hour. While that bakes, let's talk meat. An Italian-style sub sandwich, in my opinion, needs at least 3 different types of meat to be great. I've got 3 of my favorites lined up here. The first is mortadella, or fancy bologna if you haven't heard of it. The second is prosciutto, and in this case it's from Parma. Go with a cooked ham if you can't get nice prosciutto. And then finally, the third type is some kind of salami. This is a generic but delicious Genoa-style salami made right here in St. Louis by a company called Volpi. For quality sandwich meats, I highly recommend seeking out an Italian grocer or Italian deli in your neighborhood because they're used to sourcing and slicing meats properly. In St. Louis, I go to Di Gregorio Market on the Hill. That's the Italian neighborhood here in town. And yeah, that's where I go for all things Italian, including my sandwich cold cuts. The ladies behind the deli counter were super nice and let me actually film in the store while I stocked up on the meats for this video. For this sandwich, you'll need about 1 pound of thin-ass mortadella, 1 pound of prosciutto, and a half to 3/4 pound of some type of very thinly sliced salami. Back to the bread. After 30 to 35 minutes in the oven, it's time to pull out this loaf to take a look. As you can see, it's well baked, but not super dark. 375 25F is a pretty mellow temp, so the crust isn't all chunky and rustico like it would be for, say, a sourdough. That kind of bread has its place, but it's too hard to eat for a party sub. Now, I'm gonna gild this lily by brushing the outside very lightly with some melted butter. This is gonna soften the crust a little bit for sure, but it's also gonna make the outside taste amazing, and I'm gonna be refreshing this entire loaf in a hot oven right before I build this sandwich to bring a little bit more texture back to the party. Sub. When your bread looks like a well-oiled, tanned wrestler, set it aside to cool while we get the sandwich, condiments, and toppings sorted out. For this sandwich, I've got 2 sauces and 3 toppings, the first of which is chopped giardiniera. When I was at the Italian market, I picked up a few jars of their house brand mild giardiniera. If you want to know how to make your own giardiniera, check out my Italian beef video. The process is actually super easy, and I'll link to that video in the description. Now, if you're not familiar, giardiniera is essentially a mixed pickle packed in oil. There's peppers, celery, cauliflower, carrots, sometimes there's olives in there. It's salty, sour, crunchy, spicy, and indispensable for sandwich making. But most of the time it's too chunky and would stand out too much texturally in the final sandwich, so in general I like to chop giardiniera down into more of a relish. Once I've got about 1 jar of jarred chopped up, I'm going to make the first of 2 sauces, but before I do that, I'm going to quickly thank the sponsor of this video, Vessis shoes. Vessis is a sneaker company that makes 100% waterproof shoes that are designed to be worn every day. Check it out, foot in water. That should be very wet, but look at the sock. It's not, you guys, it's dry. How does that even work? Well, they actually do it with a fabric technology called Dymatex. It's basically a high-tech breathable knit fabric that hates water with a passion and works diligently to keep it off your feet. Aside from dry feet though, my favorite thing about Vessis so far is how well they've held up. I wear these Vessis just about every day. I get food on them constantly, and I've put them in the washing machine like 5 or 6 times. Yes, they're machine washable, and take a look. Good as new afterwards. Oh, and I guess most importantly, these Vessis are very comfortable. I'm not just saying that either. They're breathable and flexible just like a sneaker, and somehow they're still waterproof. That's crazy. So if you want to slip into some Vessis yourself, check them out at vessi.com/Brian and use my code Brian to get $25 off each pair of your adult Vessis shoes. That's $25 off for just using my code Brian. The link is in the description. Thank you, Vessi. Now to make some Italian dressing to lube up this sandwich, I'm going to combine 15 grams of grainy mustard, 50 grams of red wine vinegar, a squeezer of honey, like 5 grams probably, then 2 grams of salt, 1 gram black pepper, 1 gram of dried basil. That's stuck in there. I guess it was wet. Scoop that out, dried basil in, and then 1 gram of dried oregano. Now I'll stir everything to combine, and while it's moving, I'll grab 150 grams of extra virgin olive oil and I'll start to drizzle that in. Keeping the vinegar, honey, mustard mixture moving at first when we add the oil is going to make emulsification a lot easier. If we just combined everything and then shook the oil and vinegar together, it would separate like almost instantly. Once I got the oil drizzled in and I've got a little bit of an emulsion going on, I'm going to add a lid onto it and then shake it up aggressively. Now the dressing is fully emulsified, and you can tell because it's opaque. That tells me that the oil and vinegar are holding together and they're going to sit on your palate a lot more unified. Next up, condiment 2 is going to be a Calabrian chili garlic mayo. For that, into a high-sided container, I'll combine 150 grams of nice-tasting mayonnaise. See my potato salad vid if you want a good recipe for homemade mayo. Then 50 grams of roasted red bell pepper and 30 grams of Calabrian chilies, along with whatever oil sticks to them. Now in goes my immersion blender, and I'll spin this up until the peppers are combined. And oh yeah, off camera, I did add in 5 grams of raw garlic. Like 1 clove minced is all you need. Also, you could skip this immersion blender step and just hand chop everything and mix it together with the mayo, but I really prefer the smoother, creamier texture of the puree. And there we go, a fruity, spicy, unique tasting spread that's gonna glue this sandwich together. The last 2 details I need to hit here are some shaved red onions and some shredded iceberg lettuce. Hey, check out this little BB head of iceberg. They're selling these for like wedge style salads, and they're super cute. They're kind of expensive, but cute. To shred this, I prefer to use my mandolin over, say, a knife because it just straight up gets a lot thinner. I prefer almost laughably thin lettuce on a sandwich like this, and yeah, that looks pretty thin. For the onion, I'll do the exact same thing by shaving it really thin on the mandolin. 1 small red onion should give you more than what you need for this sandwich. Okay, topping sorted now. Let's build this sub. I went ahead and refreshed that giant sandwich loaf in a 375 oven for about 5 to 8 minutes to get that exterior crust a little bit more crispy. Next, I'm gonna slice that thing in half from end to end. And yeah, that's surprisingly challenging to do perfectly flat. That's not straight, bro. Now, the first thing down is going to be 5 to 6 large spoonfuls of that chopped jardiniere. Make sure to get a little bit of the spicy oil that the jard is sitting in, because that's not only going to taste amazing, but it's also going to provide some grip to help keep things stuck together. I'll make sure the jard is very evenly spread and pressed. This is the foundational layer, so it's got to be nice and flat. And once I'm there, I'll start the meat section with mortadella. Notice how I'm layering these meats on the sandwich. This is very important. I'm thoughtfully ribboning the meat down on top of the jard instead of just laying it flat. Laying meat flat is a noob mistake for sure. If we just layered things like that, there would be no air inside of the sandwich, and all 3 of these meats would fuse into an indistinguishable clod. Once I've got the mortadella down, I'll follow it with the salami. Out of all 3 of these meats, this one is probably the most likely to be sliced too thick, so make sure to ask the nice lady behind the counter who's slicing it for you one extra time to make it very, very thin. It's worth repeating. If salami is too thick, it's going to be chewy and not as delicious. The last meat layer here is going to be prosciutto, and out of all 3 of these meats, this one is the most delicate and the most expensive, so really pay attention and take care to layer this nicely. Now, behind the meat, I'm going to layer on a bunch of shredded lettuce. This is going to compress down quite a bit, so I'm going to go with at least 3 huge handfuls here, and once it's down, I'm going to press it flat to ensure structural integrity. Next goes on a bunch of these shaved red onions, and don't be shy, because once we cut this sandwich down, there's only going to be a few pieces in each portion. Behind the onions, I'll stir up my vinaigrette and then drizz it liberally on top of the shredded lettuce layer. Make sure to scoop from the bottom of the cup here to get the mustard and herbs into the mix, because the basil and oregano and mustard are a huge part of making this style of sandwich hit at 100%. Once the lettuce has been moistened up, I'm going to add on 4 thin slices of provolone cheese. Full fat mozz would be a good backup option as well. Just go for something mild, because this sandwich is about aged salty meat, not cheese. Now, to finish this sculpture of a sandwich, I'm going to lay 7 to 8 tablespoons of my Calabrian chili mayo onto the inside of the top of the bread. When spreading this, make sure to snack on the drips, but also make sure to let the sauce saturate deep into the crumb of the bread. When spreading, use some downward pressure to really make sure that mayo is getting into all of the tiny holes and crevices. Now, to finish, I'm going to carefully line up and then drop the crown on this queen. Right away, I'll give the whole thing a little bit of deliberate downward pressure to seal things up. And that is just filthy. You guys, look at this thing. Now, let's talk logistics. To actually serve this sandwich, we're going to need some sandwich picks. This is going to keep the whole thing behaved while we cut it into slices for our guests. I prefer to use these super long ones to make sure that they're penetrating all the way through to the bottom crust. And in total, I think you should be able to get 8 to 10 portions out of this whole sub. That's going to depend on your crew, though. If there's going to be dads at the party, then I would probably round down. Time for the cross section now. And oh my God, you guys, a chef's kiss is like not enough here. I need like a chef's French kiss to show my level of appreciation. It's a beautiful wall of salty Italian meats, and it is so perfectly held together. Look at all the different colors here too. The next time you feel like being social, please let it be because you made a 6-pound sandwich. I truly hope you guys try this soon, and if you do, definitely tag me on Instagram because I really want to see it. Let's eat this thing.